wonderful things that can happen to a poet is that another poet that you love and whose work you admire asks you to collaborate on a book of poems. And that's what happened to me with Jack's request about 2 years ago, I guess it is. So what we decided we would do is create this kind of conversation in poems, Jack, being the good guy that he is, said, why don't you write the first one, and then we'll go from there. And so I took as my project for the first poem a painting that I really liked by the painter Albrecht Dürer, Meditation on Small Things. The painting by Dürer is called The Great Piece of Turf, and it was painted in 1503. And it's a piece of turf in Germany, but it looks like a piece of turf that could have been taken out of the environment in Church Point or Iota or Houma or anywhere. And so this is the poem, a sonnet, Dürer's Meditation on Small Things. It is the composition I'm forever walking by, moves me most when I finally stop to look. What is it turning us outside ourselves? What hook hooks us and pulls us from whatever sky we have come to inhabit as though we love there and only there? It is a switch after all, this hook. It shifts horizons. Heavy mauve the sky can be is eclipsed by something as neatly stitched as this little patch of earth. I have measured what moved me here. This patch is small by any standard, but so rich we could get lost in this country of green if we were to try. A small golden ribbon of a snake, you ask? It is your book to read. Crested dandelion stems, landscapes of crooked grasses, what my eye loved, I made for your eye.
I responded to Darrell's poem with a poem based on one of Matisse's paintings, The Artist and His Model, and it's the one from 1919. If you've seen any of Matisse's work, he wanted to paint really comfortable paintings, but if you've seen him paint himself, he always painted himself kind of miserable, uptight, and like he had a stomachache. And I always thought that was sad, that he can't enjoy anything he's got in his life, or that when he sees himself like that. And that's how this poem, that's the tack he did to it. The Artist and His Model. There's never been a hand more versed in the way light curves around beauty, how color cushions life day by day than his. Yet here's Matisse, stiff as iron, his spine so straight the stripes of his pajamas could almost cut their way off the canvas. Not 3 feet away, a sumptuous nude reclines in the most comfortable armchair ever painted, the lines of her body at peace, the room around her aromatic and brewing slowly like spiced tea, flowers lean, a tablecloth pours like honey on the pink tile, the air, full of sea salt, glows gold and warm. The artist, though, is cold at work, his brush poised but not painting a thing, his canvas so empty and joyless it makes my chest ache with fear it may never fill, that he might never see himself in all this richness. Across the room, my wife's on one knee putting a sweatshirt on our youngest boy, his smile so big it could swallow the heavy sun flooding in from the back door glass. In the kitchen, our crab stew thickens on the stove. Garlic rolls rise through the house and settle somewhere near my soul. I close the book, take one deep breath to let it go, and slouch so far into the couch I could easily be a lost poem.
We started the book off with these poems about paintings, and as Jack's poem sort of leads us toward, we ended up spending a lot of time in the book talking about things that were much closer to us than music we were listening to or paintings we were looking at. And the next poem I'm going to read is a poem called Scratch. My mother was a sort of no-nonsense woman, and she could dole out really stiff and scary punishment. And I've never seen her so angry as that afternoon when they delivered her cedar chiffero, something she probably had worked for a great deal and had been wanting for a long time. And not long after it was delivered into the house, someone's initials were scratched into it. And the poem begins there. Scratch. Since that afternoon years ago when my mother put us on our knees and told us she was leaving, I have placed myself in the world, measured myself against the horizon, let the sky cover me like some angel bird hovering. I have seen wide ribbons of pine making a trot line at the earth's edge. I have studied things up close, stunted trees growing out of rock. I have gone beyond tree lines where grasses open seed pods like prayers. I have stood at the water's edge and wobbled, and still no one knows who knifed the unreadable lettering on my mother's new cedar chiffero that day. She and my father drove to town to buy gorefish for our usual Friday supper at my aunt's house. We were questioned again on her return, but no one confessed. Through the fish cleaning, the seasoning, the frying. I can't remember when exactly we laughed and ran through the yard with our cousins. It was night when we went home. We were happy. Just last week, some 50 years later, one of us brings it up in my mother's presence. She has not walked for years, and it is no big matter to her now. But none of us are fessing up today either. We all know who didn't do it, and one of us knows who did.
Some of the poems, it took a while for the connection to become apparent to me when I was trying to write in response, but this one wasn't like that at all, because when I read how his mother doled out justice, my mother couldn't have been more different. She didn't let anything sink in. She was swift and brutal. So this is my mother's kind of justice. The poem's called The Injury Wall. My mother had no use for subtlety. Her lessons came without parable, without nagging hints or leading questions to herd us toward the light. If she wanted our feet off the coffee table, she gave us one chance, then kicked them off herself. If she thought the girl I'd brought home was split tail or a waste of time, she said so before any food was served. No need to put work into a lost cause. To teach us the brutal truth of pain, she had the injury wall. When my father or brother came home bloodied or broken, she'd back them up against our living room wall, right in front of the cypress shelf that held what was left of the china figurine she'd kept before us, and snap a Polaroid before they'd get any doctoring. The pictures testified to all the history of hurt we'd seen. My father burned and hairless from a rig fire, so hot it melted away the black stone from his Masonic ring. My brother skinned raw from running his motorcycle into the neighbor's house, the flathead screwdriver in his pocket mistaken for a broken rib. The boy from next door who'd torn an ear when we pitched him off the roof into our magnolia bed. Only the photographer and I were absent. It wasn't that I was such a good student or that luck shined on me in any way to keep me off the wall. It's just my pain was never skin deep or photogenic enough to rake pulling the camera down. A broken collarbone here, some cracked ribs there, a heart left behind by some Jolie Blanc. Truth is, I still lie awake some nights conjuring scrapes, pulling scars to the surface ugly enough to earn me a spot on the wall, and wondering what my mother would say about that.
And talking about different kinds of brokenheartedness, it's funny when you write poems how far back you go or where the poems sort of anchor themselves. And this is a poem called Lovesick from Lesbos to Nashville. And I know that when I began to write this poem, I was thinking about Ed Sanders, who was one of the people in the Fugs, that was like before rock and roll, or very early rock and roll. And it was sort of a rock punk movement before those terms were even in our vocabulary. But he read a series of poems when he visited us at the university one year called Sappho's Got the Blues. And I knew that I loved Sappho, but I didn't know exactly why. And when Ed said that, I thought, well, of course. And Sappho and Hank Williams and George Jones and Tammy Wynette, they're all family. And so that's what this poem is about. Written in several parts, lovesick from Lesbos to Nashville, with an epigraph by Hank Williams, "The moon just went behind a cloud to hide its face and cry." The beginnings of the poems all begin with one of Sappho's fragments. Number 37, "You know the place then. I prayed you would come to me. I tried to lure you with the murmuring of streams in stands of apple trees. You were with someone else you could not leave. Bees made music for you in your own lemon grove in Crete." Number 39, "He is more than a hero. I tried and tried to tell you how I could not speak if I met you suddenly. I tried to move you even with a broken tongue. A thin flame, I told you then, runs under my skin. Well, today blood could hardly be said to run. A wafting of ashes there instead, sick birds struggling in the lightest winds." Fragment 42, "I have not heard one word from her. All that talk about unwilling parting, all that poetry about our gifts to Aphrodite, how you melted me in that sad hour with sung apologies. You could not leave, you said, without reminding me. No voices chanted choruses without ours. No woodlot bloomed in spring without song. I hung on your every word, asked you only to remember who you left hobbled. It is no wonder the moon just went behind a cloud to hide its face and cry." Number 45, "If you will come, I shall put out new skin for you to rest on." Number 63, "Last night, I dreamed you and I had words, Cyprian, my skin crawled." Fragment number 87, "We know this much. Death is an evil. We have the gods' word for it. They too would die if death were a good thing. When you left, it was like death. Birds of ash in the lemon grove had no song. They were not nightingales, did not know what to do in a world unlighted. The hours could weigh heavily or could not. It was nothing to them. Someone slipped the knot of gravity. It was like death. We know this much."
This coupling is probably one of the ones that has to sink home. That poem had to sink home on me for a while before I could find a way to kind of communicate with it. And I think I hitched onto the notion of what we know and don't know, and what we consider knowledge and not knowledge, and the things that we need to pass on. And that's what this poem is about. It's called Elvin Jones at Midnight. And it's based loosely on a poem by Coleridge, Frost at Midnight. If y'all know that poem, he takes his baby out and he shows the baby the sky and then pretty much says, "There you go, kid. That's, more or less all I can do for you." And I always thought that, good parenting on that. Saying, this is an example of how my parenting would go. Elvin Jones at Midnight. There are nights when I have complete control of the stereo. Nights when I can put on Coltrane without my wife's face dropping into a frown. Those nights, I can step to the back door with the inexcusable pleasure of Elvin Jones harassing the snare with his left hand, tickling more sound out of his cymbals than any one limb should be able to get, and kicking just enough ahead of the beat to make the whole band chase his time. There's an undertone of harmony in Jones' kit I know I'll have to explain to my sons one day, hopefully in moonlight, hopefully soon. I'll load them into the golf cart with drinks and clubs and a jam box, take them out onto the 9th green behind our house, and let them loose to do whatever damage they can out of earshot of their mother. I'll play the music for them, tell them it's the same sound my blood makes going through my ears, hoping they'll listen long enough to understand. before one of them asks me to shut off the noise or to put on something with words in it, before I have to tell them it's the words that mess things up sometimes.
I said when I introduced an earlier poem that my mother was a kind of no-nonsense woman, but toward the end of her life, she began to be interested in her dreams, something that that never would have occurred to her earlier on. And I went to visit her one day, and I was getting ready to leave, and she said, "I dreamed about your daddy last night." And I wasn't happy with him then either. My father hardly ever spoke, but he was very democratic in his not speaking. He didn't speak to us, he didn't speak to her. He spoke a little bit to the men that he worked with, but that has something to do with the way the poem ends. The arum lilies in my mother's dream. My mother says he looks like he just stepped out of a photograph in this visitation. This man, my father, is wearing a blue seersucker suit, she says, and a red tie. This is a man who never wore a blue anything, and he never owned a red tie. But here he is in her dream. He barely speaks in this apparition. He pushes his chair from the table, gets up and stands for a moment, seeming to admire the arum lilies she's brought in from the garden. She could not have told if he had any feeling at all for flowers. He seldom said what he liked. A moment only, then these flowers, and then he says he has to go.
That dream reminded me of a dream that my aunt tells me she has all the time on my ranch. And she's a generation from down the bayou, a generation of people that didn't have any English, and she was kind of dragged to the English school and was punished severely for not speaking English or for using French. And she still has dreams, monthly kind of about that, where she wakes up and she's at the, it's kind of like that dream you have that you're naked at school or that you can't remember where your classes are and it's finals week or something. Well, she has dreams of waking up at the English school and doesn't know what to call her lunch, kind of thing. And I can't tell you how big a relief it is that I don't have to define anything in this poem. When I read it in Connecticut, I had to alter a gloss. The poem's called Bugali. Mamaran says she still has dreams of walking to the English school, afraid because she has no words for the croûte de pain or étouffée she's brought for lunch, knowing she'll kneel on rice for hours, or worse, be sent to march around the flagpole with one red brick in each hand, while blonde tattoos from in front of the class giggle and sing songs about her. She says these dreams last for days, useless like food on the tongue, unswallowed. When she wakes, her knuckles ache so fierce it takes her most of the morning to lay her fingers straight, and longer before her knees feel right for walking.
When you write a book of poems, you're sort of hard-pressed to talk about what might be a poem that you like or a favorite poem. But this poem, I have no problem with. I love this little poem. It's a poem called Holly Beach, 1952. And I think one of the reasons that I love it so much was that every time I had written a poem about the Louisiana wetlands or the Louisiana coast, I had always put the beach at Grand Isle. Somehow I thought that that was a prettier beach. But that wasn't the beach that I had gone to. And so this is the poem sort of making myself honest about who I am and where I lived in the world. And Holly Beach today is as beautiful as it's ever been. The only blight are the new camps. If we only could have had that beach without any buildings around it at all, I think we could have seen its beauty. Holly Beach, 1952. I was 10 when my parents brought me to the beach for the first time, and it was somewhat hard to tell what of this grayish ground was sand and what was water. There was clearly something happening in the line where the horizon was supposed to be, some curve I knew from land and how it met the sky. I was not completely unfamiliar with rhymes. The earth itself teaches the young who look and measure, with strands that finally knit themselves into some kind of rope of meaning, fine distinctions that merge into larger being. But I had never had to stand by myself before something I could walk into like this, could climb into, it seemed to me, as the gulf shaped itself into this bulge, a grand stilled opacity that did not even look like water. I had surely primed myself to bravery as parents and aunts and cousins and sisters fanned behind me in their own play. But when the water finally surged around me, I was 10, could never have imagined such rotary or how to hold a dizzy sea.
My son discovers the draw of water. And it's for Samuel. He was still getting used to the sand between his toes when the cool Gulf water crashed around his thighs, knocking him back, then drawing him closer to home. It took barely a second for his face to go from complaint to laughter, for him to feel the rhythm of the tide, to taste the salt splashing his smile, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, again and again, all light and love. It wasn't until the water reached his chest he realized this was more than a game of chase, more than simple joy, and that all pleasures come with a price. He turned to the shore and cried for us to bring him back to the heavy sand.
Of the poems in this book, one of the ones that I'm not particularly crazy about is the next one that I'm going to read. It's called The Hand of Thought. And the hand of thought is a hand that has to open up. But I want to read this poem because I want you to hear Jack's response, The Geese on Highway 16. The Hand of Thought. We have this notion about roads we walk on. We think that if we should cross a bridge once, it will be there to cross again. We stalk regularity and sameness. We want the ridge we covered yesterday to be the one seam we can rely on forever. We want the windows in our houses to give us steady beams of light. In autumn, we want yellow indoor light to fall softly on the carpets, the creams and reds and blues in them hardly disturbed. Winter light will be dense and heavy, table weight. Talk, but nothing to do us in. Something in us cringes at the thought of running into things, and we bark at anything. Boulders, leaves, swarms of midges.
The Geese on Highway 16. I took Highway 16 north out of town for the first time the other day. Not 2 miles out, the flat piney land I'd lived in for a decade and a half, it turned into rolling hills, sweet grass and dairy farms on both sides of the road, like nothing else in Louisiana, treeless and filled with black and white Guernseys lolling around cow ponds, haystacks, red barns in the distance. Every hill I topped offered a scene off a butter box, complete with farmhouse and green tractor. I couldn't help but feel I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Then unexpectedly, the road crooked east, and every foot of pasture land as far as I could see was covered with geese, Canada geese, each a yard tall and big around as my 6-year-old son. Most were grazing, but some seemed on guard, honking and watching the road for what might pass occasionally. At the bottom of a hill, I slowed my truck just to try a rough count. I looked 10 by 10 until I confused myself. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of these geese, so loud and out of place I had to pull off the road to shake my head and laugh. What a heck of a morning it must have been for the farmer, coming out on his porch at dawn, hot coffee and paper in hand to find this flock had landed.
On listening to Schubert, Franz Schubert contracted syphilis when he was 25 years old. He lived until he was about 39. And I mean, to get syphilis in any time, in any age, is a hard knock. But to contract syphilis at the time that Franz Schubert lived, it's the days before penicillin, and it was a death sentence. And this is on listening to Schubert. I often wondered why so much of his music was so melancholy. And in a documentary that I was watching this weekend, he says in one of his letters, to wake up every morning and know that you are going to never get better and never be cured makes you not want to wake up in the morning. And I guess that's had a great deal to do with what happens in a lot of Schubert's music. It is mechanics of mind that intrigues me most in Schubert's Quintet, Opus 163. All that initial creeping necessary for what is being set up. Grief underlies all it tries to cover up. In this geography, it matters little if the sky is blue with mare's tails or blue without. If the sky is the white hot the sky becomes at noon on clear summer days, or veiled white sky with thinly fallen snow, or slate, or black with thunderheads, or not. We are mostly moved away and not toward anything. The strings, our only consolation.
Shortly after I read Darrell's poem, I saw a documentary on one of my favorite musicians, Django Reinhardt. I don't know how much y'all know about Django Reinhardt. He was an excellent guitar player, probably one of the best ever. I've never met a guitar player, a trained guitar player, that didn't say he was, so I wouldn't trust him on that. And Reinhardt was a Manouche gypsy who was kind of elevated to real fame and favor in Nazi-occupied Paris in France, and he was, if you made a list of reasons why Hitler was rounding up people and killing them, he would have been on, he would have had several things on that side of his list. He didn't have any reason to be alive. And most people considered his music very happy, but when I hear it, you can hear the tragedy under it, no matter how happy the arrangement is. And so I thought of that connection between these two artists that Darrell pointed out. I mentioned a couple things in here I might need to talk about. The La Cigale is one of the bars in Paris where he played often to packed houses. And I make a reference to Hitler wanting to hear him play. And there were several instances where Hitler sent out direct invitations to him that he never responded to. In fact, almost every time he got one of those, he tried to escape. He tried to flee the country, which probably smart. Django Reinhardt at La Cigale. He's come to the stage late from gambling, his stomach heavy with wine and steak. But the German officers queued up to see him don't mind the wait. They have champagne, French women, and his guitar to make them happy. He plays like a man lucky to be alive, a jazz-playing crippled gypsy accompanied by a Jew and 3 blacks, surrounded by Nazis in occupied Paris, free beyond any logic, free to play. His swing bubbles on the surface, perfect for hugging and conversation, laced with enough lines of Les Allemands, even the Fuhrer would love to hear a set of his St. Louis blues. Yet as high as the violin climbs in the score, are as quick and bright as his guitar runs. He cannot escape the Manouche frown underpinning it all, the thought of 500,000 of his brothers starving on moldy bread and rancid pork in concentration camps only a few hundred miles from this club. His music, the same they'd play on accordion given the life to do so. His heart, 2 places at once. No matter how hard he tries, no matter how many people smile at his work, the notes his 2 good fingers free from the fretboard of his guitar will never make it to the border.
Jack suggested that one of the groups, in addition to the Jews, that Hitler was considered vermin and wanted to exterminate were the gypsies. There were many other people that were included in that group. And Jack makes reference to his 2 good fingers on the fretboard. When Django Reinhardt was a young man, he was burned in a fire in his gypsy wagon, and so he had a mangled hand and played this incredible guitar with that crippling. Photograph of my father, 1944. In this one photograph of my mother with her 3 children, I am 3. My father is in California. My mother is beautiful in this new role she's in. My older sister looks directly at the camera. Her beauty is straight ahead beauty. My younger sister turns her face to the side, her beauty devastatingly oblique then and now. I am blank-faced with loss. We are all being shaped by the very gift we are trying to get to him before he's shipped out. He will fade differently for each of us. He will come home. He will tend to us in his quiet way. Each of us will go on. I will put lilies on his grave at Easter time.
Family album. All the pictures my mother saved over the years are posed. Nothing candid. No shots of the old man in bliss, barbecuing in the August heat, taking that first sip off a Falstaff can. No pics of her in hot pants, full throat laughing, leaning against the door of the new Chrysler. Every Polaroid she's held on to looks like it should have a string attached to its back that moves my arm toward the fireplace they just put in the living room, or that bends my brother at the waist to show off the kitchen's new parquet when the string's pulled. The dancing at crab boils, the stolen kisses, the times my brother fixed my shirt collar and put his arm around my shoulders at the bus stop. These images are kept in conversations now, passed around the table on Sundays like gumbo, left to hang in the room like mist waiting for the sun.
If you ever think you have inclinations to be a poet, let your mama take pictures. And then you have subjects for the rest of your life. And then think about all the pictures she didn't take, and you have Jack's last poem. Friday night fish fry. We all gathered under the oak tree in the backyard. The fish is frying in one black pot, and over the other fire is my aunt's coubillon made from 3 large catfish the men caught earlier in the day. It is not dark yet, but the moon in the east is a large yellow plate floating on the horizon. Our 2 bay mares are sleeping under it. What matters least is what we don't have in this moment. Anything withheld pales in waves rising from those 2 black pots.
Growing up, we had all those fish fries during Lent, but there was no joy in them because it was just a meal you had to eat. So the Saturday night meal was the meal that we had the fun with, and my folks, they're you know, they like to say they were old when they had me, so they didn't. I don't remember them having much fun. But these Saturday night meals, like the crab balls they had on Saturday night, they would. I didn't know what a block party was, but they had block parties. They would shut the garage and honky-tonk. And the most fun I can remember as a kid comes from hiding under the table while they ripped it up. And that's what this poem's about. It's called Saturday Night Crab Balls. And it's a prose poem, so it kind of unravels. By the time the kids came in from playing chase or foursquares or horseshoes, the tables were already piled high with blue crab, potatoes, and corn, all of it steaming hot and full of pepper and lemon, right off the butane and out of the pots. The eating was straight noise, everybody cracking shells with the handles of butter knives, picking out meat, and telling stories over somebody else's beat. The women drank highballs in gold-rimmed glasses. The men pulled beers from salted ice in every kind of can you can imagine. Pabst Blue Ribbon, Slits, Pearl, Falstaff, Jacks. Then in no time flat, the shells were rolled up in old newspaper and thrown in the garbage cans outside. The tables were folded up, and somebody cranked up the music for the Fado Do. As soon as the 8-track came on, our folks danced like the garage was the VFW hall. They turned up the Frankie Lane and spun each other out into the oyster shell driveway, right into the street sometimes, spinning and juking to where the wild goose goes, and not caring who heard, or who saw, or who wasn't invited to the party. They made joy, and we watched. Our folks moved and laughed and sang like nothing had to be cleaned or put away, like Monday wasn't going to be hard for any one of them.
We sort of came full circle at the end of the book. I wrote a poem. At some point in the middle, Jack began to send me poems that I was responding to, and we sort of lost documentation about who was sending what to whom. But at the end, I had seen the painting on the cover of the book, and you can get a closer look at it. Jack has some books in the other room. I had seen this painting in New Orleans in a studio of a friend of mine, and it immediately caught my attention, and I asked her, you know, how far the painting was along and so forth, and she said the painting is called Ornoville, and it's a landscape with a barn near Ornoville, but it could be a barn on Highway 35 or a barn on Highway 190. We see these kinds of scenes in our daily life. But the thing that got me to the poem was this little black rectangle that those of you in the back can't see. But Gloria pointed to the painting and she said the hardest thing to paint in that painting was the door of the barn. That black rectangle. How do you paint nothing? And I knew I had a poem in that. The black door in Ornoville. It might be what you don't see that most pleases in this scene. There are possible banks everywhere in this thick expanse of lively grassland. Water teases a presence here and storms embed themselves in the charged air. Beyond the darkest trees on the horizon, whole families may be filling sacks with shoepeak or hand fishing for turtles. Lovers could settle in away from us in that little cluster of trees near the barn. But these are passing things. They startle no one. Mere skitterings to circumvent the black door of mysteries opening the rusty tin-covered white pyramid amidst all the marble life teeming here. A grave opening, defying opening. No one sees anything discernible beyond this dark plain. There is something there, we think or hope, but it invites nothing we can easily take comfort in, frees nothing. Yet it is the painter's gift to us, something the landscape has to bear.
One of the reasons I wanted to stop with these poems, because we had other poems we could have worked with, is that these were the poems we wrote without seeing each other's work, just having seen the painting. And when these two crossed in the mail, and so much of what we were doing, we were chewing on the same things, I thought, well, that's
the end of the book.
That's it. So, even some of the notion of the invitation at the end of your poem, that comes in my poem kind of full circle. So I thought, that's it. We're not going to get any closer than this. Mine's called A Barn in Arnoldville. It sits on the edge of pasture land, surrounded by scrub brush and hardwoods. Its doors swung wide open, all black inside and calling across the fields to horses at play and men fixing fence so far away they lean into the horizon. Its offer still cool shade and safety from the afternoon storm brewing overhead. Everything growing on this land responds by bending toward its invitation, straining in the breeze against the dirt to head toward shelter. Tall grass swirls and trees huddle as close as they can around the barn's edges. Inside, there's nowhere near the space to hold it all, yet something in the darkness gives us hope.
And I'm going to get off the stage for a while, and Jack's going to read some poems solo, and then I'll come back up later.
My plan was to let Darrell read. I'll read some new poems for y'all. Just a couple. And these are pretty new, so if I make faces, it's not personal. This poem, the first poem, is called Las Palapatat, which is something the old people in my family told me, and I knew what it meant. I mean, I knew what it said, I should say. I knew it meant don't drop the potato, but I didn't know what it meant until just recently. Because the old people in my family aren't big on telling what things mean. This is a poem about, I guess, telling someone not to give up. And I should say that I know many of you are writers yourselves, and one of the hardest things in the world is to tell the story of something that happened to you for risk it isn't going to mean the same to somebody else. And this is something that happened to me when I was a kid that's kind of a pain in my history. But when I tell the story to people, they kind of laugh. And I could never write it because it always became a poem about woe is me, please feel sorry for me, when it's silly. I won a horse when I was a kid at a raffle, a pony. And you see, laughing at my trail. And everyone should be happy about that. But when I got to the pony, it was about 20 years old, and it had been in a petting zoo. So it only walked in a circle, and it would walk for 3 minutes and then stop for a minute, and then walk again. And you had to get off if you wanted it to walk again, because it had been trained to, like that kid had paid his $1, so he gets 3 minutes. You had to get off. And when I won this horse, it dawned on the people who were getting rid of this horse at the horse race that, oh, we got to give him a saddle, I guess. And so they just grabbed the oldest saddle they could find, but it was a quarter horse saddle. And you couldn't tie it tight enough for it to fit this little Shetland pony. So when I would get on this thing and try to make it turn left, the saddle would ride around to the belly, and it would keep walking. If that happened a minute in, I had 2 minutes of being dragged on my head. And I got to add, because I don't know if I put it in the poem, this is all happening in the backyard in a subdivision. So my parents are looking out the window, and cars are crashing behind our house at the sight of this. And my parents' memory of this is Jack's afraid of animals. And every time I wrote that poem, it seemed, woe is me, man. Like, my parents don't understand, my horse wouldn't go there. And so I chewed on this poem for a while, and so I found out that the only way I could do it was I wrote it kind of as if I were watching a neighbor boy do this, and doggone it, I was going to give the kid that credit he deserved. And so it's called Las Palapatat. Out the back door glass, I watched the neighbor boy try as hard as a 7-year-old can to ride the pony he won at raffle yesterday. The mount is old and ornery and doesn't take to his efforts very well. It must have lived in a petting zoo all its 15 years, because no matter what the boy does to make the animal keep going after it's stopped, or to turn left out of the circle it walks, the thing does what it does. It moves for 3 minutes clockwise, stops for a minute, then moves again, even if the boy's fallen off, pulling too hard to make it turn. The saddle that came with the prize is bound to be quarter horse size. It shifts around to the belly if the boy leans when he pulls, dragging him across the grass. From this distance, it would be easy to think he's afraid the way he jumps off every chance he gets, to miss just how patiently he waits for the pony to stop, then picks himself up off the ground and lifts the saddle back up into its place for another try. And that's what makes me watch. I see his faith at work and hope it ages better than mine. I want to tell him to keep it, to hold on, that his load won't get much lighter, but his fingers are sure to grow around it. My wife's always on me about when you write poems about your sons, they're always playing in the yard and having a good time. But when you write about the girl, she's always sleeping. So here's a poem about her. The baby slept. I got no defense against that. She's always sleeping because she reprograms my TV when she's awake. The baby slept. Her eyelids bounced twice, then slowly closed tight, while her breathing slowed enough for everything in the house to have its say. The floorboards settled, the AC clicked off, The window panes rattled a bit against the wind, and time lost purpose, expanded, gained possibility, ambled around the kitchen, trying to decide whether it was food or sleep pressing itself against my heart to be petted and put aside again. And you just stood there, waiting for the first rustling. And I'll finish with this poem. Darrell asked me to get involved in a celebration of Lincoln's bicentennial, and I'll be honest with you, I hadn't really thought much about Lincoln, apart from Honest Abe and freedom and that kind of stuff. But I don't really write about that. So I had trouble connecting to him as a human being. I read a couple things. You know, I always read when he was young, he worked hard in the field, but then I read an essay on him that said he really didn't work at all. He just stole books from all over town and brought them out there and read. And I liked him a whole lot more. And I also read that he had only one window in his house, which was a luxury, but he had a window, but that he never got to see anything because he left before the sun came up and he was back after. And I thought that was sad, kind of like the Matisse said in that first poem we read. So I tried to connect him with that. It's called Lincoln's Window. It faced the south field, liminal, showing the boy all he thought he'd know of the world. Work as sure as dirt, rows to plow, days straight and finite, stacked as close together as the land would allow. The sun rose to the left of it and set to the right, just like it did in Rome or London or even Kentucky. But most days he'd have to take all that on faith. By dawn, he was already in the field, waiting for enough light to climb over the tree line for him to see the print on the pages he'd smuggle out to the plow in his pocket, pages that showed him the lives of men as far from the rows he plowed as far could be. Washington and Franklin drawing freedom from the air, the unforgiving creed of Arabian Nights, the justice and infinite vengeance of a God who'd send two she-bear to tear dozens of children limb from limb for daring to call his prophet bald. By dusk, his head was already on the pillow, and he faded with the light into those stories, dreaming of words that carried him to wherever the sun might be at the time, words he'd carry back to all of us one day to change whatever views we had from behind our own simple glass. Thank you all very much.
I wasn't going to read this poem because I read it last year at the library, but it's a good segue into my next part of the reading. In that same event where we were asked to write Lincoln poems, one of the things that happened to Lincoln, one of the, I think, a really important event in his life was coming down to Louisiana. Lincoln came to Louisiana twice on a flatboat in 1829 and in 1931 when he was 19 years old and 21 or 22 years old. I think it was a very significant thing that happened to him. All the time that he was growing up, as Jack pointed out, he found books and he worked on educating himself, even if it meant that he had to steal the books. And his father's biggest fear was that he would be educated, that he would become educated. When Lincoln returned from New Orleans, he lived with his parents for about 3 months, and then he left, never to return to them. And he began working on the Lincoln that he would become. When Lincoln came to New Orleans the first time, a few miles south of Baton Rouge, near Donaldsonville, he and his buddies who were on the flatboat pulled in to sleep for the night, and a group of fugitive slaves attacked them. And we usually think of Lincoln as this sort of tall, gangly, skinny guy, but Lincoln was a man of great strength, and he could do things that were kinds of athletic marvels. And he fought off all of the men who attacked him and received a gash over his right eye, a gash that was deep enough that he wore the scar all of his life. And so that works its way into the poem. But the thing that really affected Lincoln was he was witness to slave auctions during that time. New Orleans represented Lincoln's longest trip that he ever took, and it represented his trip to one of the most cosmopolitan areas in the United States. And I think it's hard for us to realize what a Kentucky boy or an Illinois boy was like at the time, and how sophisticated and how different a world he was coming to in New Orleans. And Lincoln and them did this, and Lincoln, not only Lincoln, but many other kids from the North did this kind of thing long before Mark Twain wrote the classic American story, Huckleberry Finn. And I like to think Lincoln sort of out Huckleberry. Lincoln in New Orleans, 1831. When he arrived that year, he had to walk a mile or so on flatboats to reach the shore. He had poled and floated here, watched hawks circling overhead on lazy afternoons, still bore the scar he'd gotten when he chased and fought off 7 fugitive slaves who tried to rob him and his measly crew near Baton Rouge. He pasted some home remedy on the gash and then stemmed the blood with some cloth he had on board. It lasted all his life, this scar over his right eye, but it hemmed in nothing. What really lasted was the chatter and talk around the Sparrows Exchange, where one mulatto girl more was trotted and pinched, undressed, while buyers gawked and ciphered for the lowest price they could get her for. Kitchen light. My mother cannot see her kitchen clearly from where she lies under clean sheets. It is little more than a narrow hallway now, a little sink, a little place to drain dishes, and lots of shelving her eyes never see. From her bed she hears the microwave or the grease popping in the iron skillet as I pan-fry pork chops I brought her. She hears the water running or doors opening and closing, and she sees light streaming toward her from a shadowy space her eyes often travel to when I am here. Years ago it was she who cooked for us. Years ago she baked bread for the girls at the school in a neighboring town. Years ago she feared coming into her house after dark, but she did so anyway. Years ago she took a certain kind of joy in the chemistries of making bread, or at least in the rising and the kneading. She loved the way the bowls of dough seemed lighted from within, the way the enlivened dough took on the sheen of moons. Rising takes on new meanings for her these days, as does bread and dark and beds and whatever it is she cannot see. The Angel of Desire. And the first line in this poem is a line from a Mary Oliver poem, Reckless Poem. First line, sometimes already my heart is a red parrot perched. You work years and years and years as a poet to get a line where the images work that way, and Mary Oliver just does it one damn time after another. Sometimes already my heart is a red parrot perched. The Angel of Desire. Sometimes already my heart is a red parrot perched on the windowsill overlooking the garden filled with gingers this time of year. Like gingers, it repeats itself all over the place. I want, I want, I want, it says to anyone who will listen. It wants to leave heartprint everywhere. It cares neither more for sun or shade. It looks for place to roost. Flinty stone ledge or goose down bed, it's all one and the same to this demented knot. 20 times the same as one. Tracery leads to trace, trace to path, path to major thoroughfare. Kites and eagles both fly. Herons, crows, and martins inflected recall. Habitual heart, airy bobbin, parched. And the last poem is the poem My Father at Bat. My father was a wonderful softball player, and I think for a fleeting moment he had an idea that I could be that too, but it was only for a fleeting moment. One of my best memories of him is him batting balls to me, and he knew then that the boy would be a poet. My father at bat. My father is batting balls to me in the pasture. My hands are small and my glove keeps opening like a flat pan. My fingers barely reaching into the glove's fingers. This morning rain has gathered into little puddles he tells me I must not even be aware of if I'm ever to get good at this thing he's teaching me. He says the glove must become a second skin. He pops a fly, and for an instant it is the blue cloudlessness that catches my eye. I am thinking I must be a holy mess to him. He just keeps batting ball after ball after ball. At school all this ends with a bell eventually ringing. Here there are no bells to save me. It's just me and him. He is strong. He is doing what he has to do. And the sun is still high in the sky. Thank you very much.